Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior and a tall leader from the world of academia, from Seattle, USA, Professor Shalini Jain. Shalini, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. Shalini is the co-author of Managing Brand Transgressions, 8 Principles to Transform Your Brand. And you can see her book just on the screen behind her. She's an associate professor of management and director diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Milgard School of Business, University of Washington. And given the kind of track record she has, understandably, she's been recognized, felicitated, and awarded several times. So, Shalini, let me start with my first question. Tell me a little bit about your own journey and what inspired you and Mr. Jain to write your book.
Yeah. So I moved to the US about 30 years ago, and it is the mecca of higher education. And so how could I be here and not avail of that opportunity? So I did my master's and then my PhD here at the University of Washington in Seattle. And then I became a faculty at the Milgard School of Business. My research is primarily in the area of business ethics and social responsibility. So I do a research on gender equality, how are companies in India responding to the 2% CSR law, first of its kind. And so things in the area of social issues and management. And my co-author, Shailendra, is a professor of marketing. And so we also happen to be husband and wife.
Yep.
And so often our dining room conversations were always about a brand that had transgressed. And so, we would take opposing viewpoints. And so when COVID hit, we were all, in lockdown, and we thought, why don't we put our dining room conversations to good use? And so we decided that we should write this book, and it has been an exhilarating experience. We spent about three years doing a lot of research on brands in about 50 countries, over 50 years in about, I think, 25 countries. And so our book has cases from about 25 corporations. And so we are so delighted at the outcome. And our hope is that it would be of immense value to practitioners, leaders, mid to upper level management, the decision makers in corporations anywhere in the world.
And I'm sure it will be. But before I ask you my next question on your book, I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Professor Shalini Jain and Mr. Shailendra Jain's book, Managing Brand Transgressions, 8 Principles to Transform Your Brand. So, Shalini, my first question to you about your book is, how do you define a brand transgression?
Wonderful question. So academically, when a brand violates an implicit rule that is a foundation of a customer-brand relationship, that's a transgression. In simple English, if they violate customer trust in any way. Now, sometimes it's inadvertent. It could be a product failure, it could be poor service, but sometimes we have found that it has been pretty deliberate, deliberate violation of ethical, social, and sometimes even legal codes. And so once a brand, and so this happens, it's routine. It doesn't matter how big the brand is, how great the brand is, everybody undergoes a transgression at some point in the life of a brand. Well said. So our book says these are routine, and our hope is, we culled, based on our research, these 8 principles, and we are proposing that every company should adopt these, not only to prepare for a transgression, but also to transform once a transgression happens. Well, and oftentimes companies are not as well prepared as one would think.
Well said. And, can you talk a little bit about the 8 principles? And of course, I know there'll be much more details in your book, but do tell us a little bit about these 8 principles.
So perhaps I can use a current example to describe a transgression. So we heard of the recent shutdown of CrowdStrike, the IT security company, which is global in its repute. And the transgression in their case was a flawed software update, which can be called or put in the category of product quality. Not sufficient testing was done before it was launched, right? And it affected 8.5 million devices globally. And, airlines, hospitals, banks, telecommunications were kind of shut down, right? And so it is argued that about the loss was about 5.4 billion in the Fortune 500 companies. So it's a pretty serious transgression, right? So what do you do when you have a transgression? So our first principle says, do the right thing. What do we mean by that? We mean, rather than worry about the brand, worry about the victim.
Correct.
When you consider the impact on your customers, who are your most important stakeholder, you will be able to protect your brand. And so everybody knows about this famous cyanide in Tylenol in the 1980s. But many of our younger generation and primarily your audience probably have not heard of it or not in as much detail. So this was an inadvertent problem, right? Cyanide was discovered and 9 people died. And so what did the CEO do? And you're familiar, you've been in pharma, so maybe this is something that would speak to you. I think Tylenol had about 30%, was 30% of the revenue for Johnson & Johnson. And so the CEO, James Burke, said, how should we protect the people and how should we protect the brand? That was number 2. So what did they do? The first thing they did is they stopped advertising for Tylenol. The second thing they did is that he went, at that time there was no social media, but he went on television multiple times advising people not to consume Tylenol. Not to consume.
Amazing.
And said that they are investigating the matter and they will report back as soon as they know what happened and why. And they had a 24-hour media hotline. They were on billboards informing customers. They had a 1-800 number that had a human being answer calls for customers. And the pundit said, nobody's ever going to put Tylenol in their mouth ever again, right? Because of how serious, and you really didn't know why or how it came to that.
Correct.
Of course, there were stories of disgruntled employees or problem in their manufacturing plants and things like that. So the one thing was taking accountability, right? They said, yes, this has happened. As a first step, don't buy our product. We are looking into it. We are going to give you periodic updates. So here they put the customer first and the company second.
Right.
And then this is like doing the right thing. The second principle is to take accountability. So even though they didn't do anything, it had the Tylenol brand name, it had the Johnson & Johnson brand name, and so they had to take ownership for whatever was happening. They couldn't. What companies tend to do is distance themselves, obfuscate, right? Cover up information, or or do a counter offensive oftentimes. But That's not what the Tylenol or Johnson & Johnson CEO did. So he took accountability and he said that, we will fix this. Then the third principle that we talk about is to act with lightning speed, right? So contrary to the advice of lawyers or his own C-suite, he went ahead and said, don't buy our products. Many people felt it would open them up for lawsuits. They felt this was overreaction. It was too early to take the stand, but he took it, right? And he went a step further. First, they stopped advertising. Then they removed Tylenol from all retailers in the Chicago metro where these deaths had happened. Then there was an incident of another incident in California. So they removed Tylenol nationwide. They stopped the sale, the advertising, and they continue to say, don't buy our product. And all of this is happening within the first week when they are still investigating.
Yeah.
Because they acted with this lightning speed. As time went by, so there was they cooperated with all the governmental authorities, and it was discovered there was no problem in their manufacturing, and there was, Tylenol came to be viewed as a victim rather than the perpetrator of this transgression, simply by how they responded to the transgression or the crisis that they were facing. And then the government came up with a overnight law which required tamper-resistant packaging. And everyone thought it would take millions of dollars, it would take years to come up with it. Within 1 week, Tylenol came up with this tamper-resistant packaging that we are also used to today.
Amazing.
So they can. The fourth principle is communicate transparently, and they did that. They said it's a problem. Yes, we found that there's cyanide, and they openly said, don't purchase our product. And then at the end of this, so it's a gold standard in how to respond to a transgression, really. And many people don't know this story. So we talk about it fairly at length in our book. And then we have the remaining 4 is choose principle over profit, right? So this was the principle that we must protect the consumer rather than protect our market share. And as a result, the market share not only bounced back, but surpassed in time. Right? Our 6th principle is to treat each life with dignity. I can go into that much more, but here again, we were treating the life of each consumer or potential consumer of Tylenol with dignity and care. And in our book, we compare Dolce & Gabbana's advertising in China to the training of employees at Taj Mumbai at the time of the terror attacks, in talking about treating lives with dignity and support, right? And then the 7th principle, which is, pretty obvious, is that it's always the top leadership that sets the tone. We are expecting frontline, mid-level employees to take these positions. They don't have the power or the influence. It's always the top leadership that sets the tone. And our last principle is to build brand authenticity, which means you say what you do and you live what you act, you walk the talk.
Amazing.
And we use the examples of Patagonia, which has authenticity baked into its DNA as an example, and we have a couple of others as well. So I can keep talking.
No, that's amazing. Thank you. I mean, your story of Tylenol and your 8 brand principles. I mean, I think these have really outlined almost all the questions that I wanted to ask you. But I'm going to now move on and ask you a question about the Boeing 737 MAX crisis, where, as someone who doesn't know much about the matter, I don't think they handled it well, but I'd love to get your perspective.
No, they didn't handle it well at all.
Okay. Mm.
So we discussed Boeing at length in our chapter, which is titled Choose Principle over Profit.
Mm.
So the story with Boeing is that it was taken over by McDowell Douglas, which was, and the takeover was actually the start of when things went wrong.
Right.
Boeing for over a century has prided itself being a company leading in engineering.
Correct.
But with the takeover, it became a company which was responding to the shareholder bottom line.
Absolutely.
So there were a series of decisions that were taken that cut corners on safety. And so what happened was Airbus came up with a new series of aircraft, and Boeing didn't have enough time to build a whole new aircraft. And so they decided to refit an existing aircraft. And in the process, lots of issues in engineering, which we discuss in detail in our book that have been reported in the media, they took cut many corners on safety. One of the most important ones being that they had sensors which didn't speak to each other. And they put in a new chip, and they didn't train the pilots on it. They made the training optional. And there were several, subsequently, the investigative journalists found that many engineers raised concerns and were silenced by the top leadership because they just didn't want Airbus to get some of their big clients that were likely to switch. And because of these series of decisions over time, we resulted in these two crashes. And it took the CEO a month to even apologize. And the apology was cold, it was distant, and it was couched in technicality. We are available to help work with the Indonesian authority to answer, questions related to, and it was not in everyday language. It didn't speak to the families who lost loved ones. It didn't acknowledge that for a very long time. So for us, they didn't do the right thing. They didn't take accountability. They even today are covering up facts on what really happened. And as a result, they have lost 32 billion and are counting. And I think, they always were in profit, but now they're reporting their first ever losses. They are struggling. They have a new CEO now. And we'll have to see what the position the CEO takes. Because even now, there's plenty of taking accountability, plenty of communicating transparently that needs to happen. And then choosing principle over profit.
Very well said.
And it is the new leader that will set the tone.
Wonderful. And, these two examples of two giants, Johnson & Johnson and Boeing, are absolutely amazing. Thank you. But my next question, Shalini, is, can brand transgressions be turned into an opportunity for growth? If so, how?
Excellent question again. So our book lists examples of where opportunities were lost and where opportunities were harnessed, right? So let's take the example of another company that we talk about, and that's Starbucks. No bigger brand, no better known company, one of the top on the planet. And so in a little outlet in Philadelphia, two Black young men were waiting for an associate, and they hadn't ordered coffee. And that's, Starbucks motto, come, relax, enjoy, you don't need to order anything. But for some reason, the barista insisted that they order something, and they said they were waiting for an associate, and she called the cops on them.
Wow.
And they were arrested, they were handcuffed in front of, a full coffee shop, even though they did nothing wrong other than not offer coffee, buy coffee. And they were arrested and taken, to downtown to the police station. And so, of course, all hell broke loose because Starbucks was associated with racial profiling.
Wow.
Right? So Starbucks' first response was on that very same day. And it was a meek, I think, LinkedIn post saying, we are aware of the situation, we're looking into it. And that was it. And immediately backfired. Even though it was so quick. And they didn't know what was happening. So they did the standard cookie cutter. But again, in this age of social media where information moves at lightning speed, that response got so much negative media attention that they kind of lost the narrative already, right? And so quickly, again, the then CEO went on national television, multiple TV channels, and apologized. He flew within 24 hours from Seattle to Philadelphia to meet these two young men in person to apologize. Have you ever heard of a Fortune 500 company CEO fly to meet two victims?
Amazing.
It was amazing. Again, a gold standard of, how you realize something went wrong, your initial response was not well received, and then how you completely turned it around. Of course, these young men were met, they were made part of a group that would advise entrepreneurs, they paid for their education at an undisclosed amount, there was a settlement. But the most important thing is then what did Starbucks do? 8,000 outlets in the United States were shut down within 2 weeks. Racial profile training of each and every one of their staff.
Amazing.
And then they had an independent law firm come and review all of their policies and give objective feedback. And they made this report public. Right? And these reports had positive things and negative things. But they made in public saying, we want to be transparent, we want to be open, we want to show you that we are trying. And so here was again, a gold standard of where there was a transgression. And the best thing is the CEO went, in the and said, the buck stops with me.
Absolutely.
He could have thrown that barista under the bus. He could have said, but he said, we set her up for failure. He took ownership. And he said, you can expect better of us. We can do better. Now, most legal counsel would tell CEOs, don't do this.
Correct.
Right? But they followed their heart, I hope. They chose a principle over profit. They treated each life with dignity. Like this is an example, right? And there was no impact on their bottom line. And this is strategies now many companies have adopted about racial sensitivity training globally.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So time for one more question. I mean, I could keep talking to you, but unfortunately, my clock is telling me to start winding up our conversation. How did the Me Too movement impact brands? And what strategies did you find effective in handling these situations?
Excellent question again. And so this is, this kind of came under our treating each life with dignity. And what we talk at length in this chapter is the story of Fox News. And I don't know if people in Asia are kind of familiar with the details. But Roger Ailes, who was the CEO of Fox News, was a kingmaker, right?
Yeah.
He got several presidents elected, and Rupert Murdoch gave him a free rein to make the Fox News channel whatever he wanted to, and he was brilliant. But he had a dark side, and not only him, but all the top men in his C-suite had the same. They were sexual predators. And, it came out after the metoo movement, and he was found guilty, as were many others. And unfortunately, in my opinion, he died before he could be held accountable. But it was a very dramatic and something that had been going on for decades. And Fox News has spent millions of dollars in settlement protecting these men because they were raking in money for them because of the ratings of their shows, right? And so here's an example of profit over principle. That it didn't matter what all your female employees were experiencing or how traumatized they were at their workplaces.
Amazing.
And so this is an excellent example of something that was not expected. Like the Me Too movement was pretty fast moving, if you think it precipitated.
Across the world,
it precipitated, and of course there's a lot of backlash and things like that. But I've actually also written a paper on that, on Harvey Weinstein, and how it all started with him, and how I use some theories, power distance belief theories, to explain that people who like hierarchy tend to be protective and tend to hold such people less accountable because they give far more weightage to their brilliance or their success or their ability to generate profit than their humanity, so to speak.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And my last question, come back to your book again. What do you hope readers will take away from your book, Managing Brand Transgressions?
That that you can make lots of money and still do the right thing.
Correct.
You don't have to choose between the two. When you do the right thing, profit follows. It has followed again and again and again in all the cases that we studied.
Amazing. And on that note, Shalini, I just want to say thank you so much for being such an amazing storyteller. I've really enjoyed every minute of our conversation. We spoke of 4 companies out of your 23, Tylenol, Boeing, Starbucks, and Fox News. All amazing stories, and I'm sure my viewers and listeners will just love that. For my audience, I'm going to repeat the 8 transgressions that you spoke about, which is do the right thing, company first, customer first, company second, take accountability, act with lightning speed, communicate transparently, choose principle over profit, treat each life with dignity, leadership sets the tone, and build brands with authenticity. Thank you for so much for speaking to me about your book. I'm sure viewers and listeners will go out and look for your book and read it because there's so much knowledge that you have put into that book. Thank you, and to Mr. Jain for this amazing book, and thank you for speaking to me. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.